in the full extent of its range. And that's why Berman scales are so much better than close-A scales. They're longer and they take longer to practice and they're more boring, but they're unbelievably important. And also the length of them is good for endurance. The next question with Berman is which edition to use, and I say use both. Use both the Carl Fischer, the old edition, and then get the David Height book also, because they're arranged differently. The Carl Fischer, the original, is arranged by pattern. In other words, you do scales, all the different keys, and then you go to whatever, arpeggios and all the different keys, and then scales and thirds, whereas the Height is arranged C major, everything, A minor, everything. And what I would suggest for your practice, for those of you who are really serious, is to take the Carl Fischer and do one pattern through every key, preferably at least the scales, maybe one other, and then go to the Height and do one major and one minor all the way through, which should take you about an hour. And then you're pretty good for the day after that. But if you do that for 6 months, I guarantee you will see a remarkable change in your playing over a long period of time. And it's just incredibly important to be comfortable in the funny, the strange keys on the clarinet. And that will come in very handy because the reason that keys other than C major get progressively harder is very simple. C major scale. Except for crossing the break, every note change is represented by one finger moving. It makes it very easy to scale. Then you go to B major. With almost no exception, every note involves at least 2 fingers and sometimes more. And often you're opening and closing holes at the same time. So to get a B major scale to sound as good as a C major scale is a lot of work. And so you have to practice it every day. And the way that you practice is also very specific, I think. We're not trying to get a legato quality in scale practice. You want each finger motion to be very quick and very efficient so that the finger moves only at the very last possible second. And it's a very abrupt motion, almost like a piston moving up and down over the keys. You don't want to be doing a lot of this kind of thing. You want to have a very efficient finger motion. You don't hit the clarinet, but you are very efficient. The legato motion is different, but it comes from a very efficient knowledge of every finger motion on the clarinet in advance. The other very good exercise for developing a finger independence is in this book by Paul Jean-Jean, the Vatican for the clarinet. Is anyone familiar with this book?
Yeah, sure.
All right, Robert Marcellus knows it. Not surprised, considering how he plays. The first exercise in this book is very simple. It's almost, I think he calls it a trill exercise, and it sounds something like this. And then you move up by half steps, all the way up to the register break. And then you play them twice as fast. Now this exercise is wonderful for smoothing out all the technique that the Berman helps you build. It really makes you isolate every motion just about on the instrument and really refine it. These are the half step and full step motions, obviously, not the scales and thirds, which are also very important. Now this exercise, you can actually use it to practice your legato technique. I don't necessarily advise that. But legato fingers differ from what I talked about before in that the motion is what you would call curvy with the fingers. Instead of strict up and down, you're trying to be just a little gentle, both going down and coming up. It's what I call the squeeze technique. Instead of coming down with maximum efficiency, you're kind of squeezing it down, like you're coming up against a little resistance coming down. And coming up, you squeeze the clarinet first and then release. It's almost like if you're going to jump off something, you bend your knees first and you come up. So it's sort of down, up. So when you have a technical passage, efficient Behrman scale type motion, but when you want it to be smooth, it's a curvy, again, we'll talk about this more the way it goes on. The last thing about the fingers, when you practice your scales, the goal is to drill the rhythm of the scales into your fingers, not just the pattern. So you must practice with the metronome, and you must be exactly with the metronome. A lot of people seem to practice with the metronome, and they don't really allow it to actually drive the force. What I tell students is the rhythm dictates the technique, not the other way around. So anything you practice technically, you practice it slowly enough so that not only can you play it cleanly, but you can play it so that every finger motion you can actually really feel the change in fingers. So when you go through your Behrman scales and you get to B major or E major or D flat major, which are much harder keys, just slow the metronome down so that every motion is really solid in your technique. Okay, so let's go now to actually talking about playing legato, which I think that where legato comes from in terms of your artistry is it comes not just from knowing the technique of playing legato, but it comes from the musical necessity to have a phrase played legato. You want to have it sound singing, you want it to emulate the human voice. And when you play music, you see it right away on the page. When you see a slurred line and it has a melodic contour to it, you start to think, how can I make this line more expressive? And you want to get, again, in between the notes. It's not just the notes on the page, it's how they connect. That's what legato is. And very famous wind player, tuba player by the name of Arnold Jacobs used to say to his students, be a singer in your brain. And what he meant by that is that in your brain, you sing the melody with the greatest purity that you would like to hear it with. And if you hear good singers, whether they're in the classical field or otherwise, when they connect an interval, there's a natural ornamento to it. They sing they don't have this mechanical stop in between. That's what we're really trying to emulate. We don't want to make a glissando between notes, but that is what we're really going after. So I talked about the squeeze technique with the clarinet, and I think the best way to try to get it is to find intervals where legato is most possible and try to practice them. And that clarion G to F is a really good interval for that. Compare that to, if we just go back and forth and really try to hear what you're getting in between those notes. So let's see what other musical phrases we can come up with that just automatically call for musically this need, this crying out for legato. When I'm playing the C, just before I'm going to make a change, the three fingers I have to move to go from C to F, I'm squeezing them down on the clarinet before I bring them up. And also, I'm thinking in my mind of connecting the C to the F, as if I were a singer, as if I were going to actually sing that portamento between them.